Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us to celebrate our 35th year of organizing in immigrant communities. I'm Lawrence Benito, Executive Director of the Illinois Coalition for Immigrant Refugee Rights, and I'm joined by our Board President and Executive Director of Mano a Mano, Dulce Ortiz. 35 years ago, Congress and President Ronald Reagan passed the last legalization program, and ICIRR was founded to help people through that citizenship process. Fast forward to today, and we are still fighting for permanent solutions for our people. What we have seen in Congress this year, with key pieces of legislation falling short of what communities need, like voting rights, police reform, and citizenship, it's clear that we cannot continue to work in our respective silos and must continue to do the deeper work of building relationships across movements and communities. Thus, our theme for this year is organizing across communities until we're all free. Despite the challenges, I continue to be inspired and energized by the resilience and ferocity of our members and leaders. The strength of our coalition has and will always continue to be our member organizations. So as we continue to push for what our communities need and deserve, we will also do the longer term work of building the power we need to win by deepening relationships and organizing across communities and movements. Before I turn it over to Dulce, I just want to take the opportunity to say thank you to all our sponsors and donors, and to express our deep gratitude for all the people that make the work happen, not only to our board and staff, but also to our member organizations and their leaders who guide us and show us the way in our campaigns. Again, big thanks and gratitude to all of you. And now I'd like to pass the mic to our board president, Dulce Ortiz.
Thank you, Lawrence. Again, my name is Dulce Ortiz, and I truly want to thank you all for joining us today. As a member organization, Mano a Mano has benefited from all the hard work ICIRR and our member organizations have been able to accomplish on the state and federal level. The programs we're able to offer to our communities ensure that our immigrant community members have the resources and tools not to only live meaningful lives, but to thrive as well. This would not be possible without ICIRR's organizing across communities and ensuring that funding continues for these very important programs, in addition to having more laws passed through the legislature so that Illinois is and remains a welcoming state for our immigrant sisters and brothers. As part of the Action Council and as the ICIRR board president, I have witnessed firsthand the amazing work and advocacy that has been done during the pandemic. Our Black and Brown communities have been disproportionately impacted, and our member organizations have been key to our success. We value the voice of our membership, and we continue to lean on our members to lead our coalition work in ensuring that our voices are heard by those with the ability to make meaningful changes for our families, because we understand we're not free until we're all free. We need your help to continue to build power and alliances in a meaningful way. We would really appreciate your support today.
I'm so pleased and honored to be here this afternoon with this distinguished panel as part of ICIRR's commemorative event. My name is Juwanza Malone. I'm the Executive Director for the Weibo Foundation, where we're currently celebrating our 100th anniversary this year and 50 years as a funder of community organizing. I want to welcome 4 phenomenal leaders to this panel. We have Nana Gyamfi, the Executive Director for BAJI, the Black Alliance for Just Immigration. There's Suma Arias, the Director of Immigration and Power Building at Community Change. We're also joined by Illinois State Representative Dagmara Avelar, who's also formerly staff at ICIRR. And last but certainly not least is Cindy Camacho, Senior Program Officer at the Julian Grace Foundation. Welcome all of you to the panel. Because we have a lot to cover in a short amount of time, I want to really just jump right into the questions. We're here because we are in the midst of a fight and have been in the midst of a fight for a while. And we want to get to a point where we are all free. So starting with you, Nana, you lead an organization that organizes at the intersection of a few issues: over policing, discrimination, criminalization, incarceration, deportation. The issues facing Black immigrants have really taken center stage, most recently with the video footage of Haitian asylum seekers at the southern border. Can you tell us about your work and what you see as the challenges and opportunities ahead, and include in that how you are supporting cross-community alliance building?
Thank you so very much, and so pleased to be here with all of these fab folks here on this panel with me and with you. And always glad to support ICIRR, and hoping that folks are going to make sure to do that as we continue with this conversation. So Baji, as you've indicated, works at the intersection of really racial justice and immigrant rights. We are the largest Black-led immigrant rights and racial justice organization in the country. We educate, organize, and advocate for the roughly 10 million Black migrants, meaning immigrants and refugees, and our families in this country. And the work that we do enables us to surface the ways in which the United States acts as empire, frankly, within this country and outside of this country, right? And so you can't talk about migration without talking about the root causes of migration. Why are people coming from our countries to this country? And that connects us, therefore, to this larger international struggle, right? Against racism, against patriarchy, all of those pieces. And so it's really important that we have that international connection. But then we also do this work here on the ground in the United States. And so that's with other Black immigrant organizations. It's with other Black racial justice organizations. We work along with African Americans to fight for racial, social, and economic justice. And it also means that we're working with other organizations that are not Black in the immigrant rights space, and organizations that are dealing with issues around labor, around health, around climate, because we are all being implicated by the same systems, all being impacted by the same systems. It's really important that we recognize where the root is, but then also how that pans out for all of us, right? So it's like that one drop that goes into a bucket of water and it creates these rings that go out. And for us, we see the root really as white supremacy and all of white supremacy's children. And we talk about racial justice because when we are free as Black people, all of us are free, right? And as the great Fannie Lou Hamer teaches us, none of us will be free until all of us are free. And so freedom is known most by the people that have it the least. And in this country, that has been Black people. The challenge is getting folks to be willing to sit there and to be there and to work out of that center, because it's your proximity to whiteness. The hope is that gives you access, and that access might become power, and you might be able to get into sort of this, what I used to call white heaven, right? And so if you focus on how you can get closer to whiteness, focus on the people that are the most thrilling to the white middle class, right? The good immigrant, the good Black people, et cetera, that somehow you'll get there. There's not an interest in focusing on Black people, because there's this idea that if you focus on Black people, you're associating yourself with Black people, and now you're subjecting yourself to potentially what this country has for Black folks, which most folks are not trying to do. But that's how we're going to get free. And so looking forward to continuing that work. We have a table Until We're Free, which is a coalition of national and local organizations focusing on the criminalization, exclusion, and separation of Black migrants from our families and communities. And we're using that work as a model for how you can focus on Black free folks and get us all free.
Thank you, Nana. I'm actually looking forward to hearing more from you throughout this panel. Hopefully you'll be able to bring us some more comments. But I want to go to Suma next. Suma, you work for a national organization also. And in many ways, you are just frankly leading the efforts around the national campaign for immigration reform. What are you seeing inside the campaigns you're driving and the partnerships that you are part of? And if you can also similarly to Nana, just talk about the challenges and or opportunities that you see and just frankly, what gives you hope?
Thank you, Jawanza, and thank you, Nana. So I do work for Community Change, an organization that for the first time in 50 years of its existence is now led by a Black man and a Latina. Most of the programs housed at Community Change are also led by women of color. Most of the organizations who are our partners are both led by Black and brown leaders. 50 years ago, Community Change was started by progressive, well-intentioned, mostly white leaders. That is no different from the national organizations and institutions that most of us are part of, including foundations. And so to Nana's point, which I think goes with what I want to say, is that many of us, even with our organizing methodology, like myself, at least at the beginning of my early organizing years, I've been doing this for 22 years, the theories and methods that influence my organizing were also developed by white men. So, where am I going with this and what is the point that I'm trying to make is that when we talk about anti-Blackness and as we examine the internal biases in ourselves, our formations, our institutions, I think we also have to acknowledge and understand that the institutional frameworks in which we operate were designed to keep us divided and in competition with each other. And that has been, a realization to me in the last years in my work, especially in the national work that I've done in the last 7 years. And that no transformative solutions can come out of these frameworks unless we're willing to challenge them, to examine them, and to change and transform our practices. We can check off boxes, which a lot of people now do. We can diversify our staff. We can diversify our teams, our institutions, and we can even learn and, the famous historical civil rights language that civil rights leaders use and that make us sound good. But, at the end of the day, none of that works because then we have a George Floyd moment and our movement realizes that none of that is enough and that what we really have to be doing and that what we really have to be talking about is transformational change. So that's where I think the opportunity is, but there comes a challenge with that as well, which I want to talk about, is that the system isn't designed for us to do that kind of work because we work in a systems that requires scalability and SMARTY goals. And how do you SMARTY goal a conversation between 10 brown, Black AAPI leaders that requires just profound time and soul and, just all that stuff that you can't measure. So although we have opportunity, I think we have the opportunity to challenge institutions because now more of us who are people of color are in powers, from, state houses to foundations and to huge organizations that have formations. That gives us an opportunity, but we must be ready to challenge the institutions and the practices within those institutions.
Suma, before I go to Dagmara, get ready, Dagmara, I'm coming to you. Can you just add to your comments just the intersectionality that you've seen and how, fighting for one issue allows for people across communities to be able to come together more?
Yeah, so we started about 4 years ago. So as I said, Community Change is an organization that houses many issues. housing, childcare, and immigration. And even within this organization, we have silos. About 4 years ago, we started creating opportunities for us to develop the building of Black, Brown, and immigrant work, which was going deep within the conversations and talking about what are the things that are, because we're all very good about talking about the problem, but what is it that's keeping us from actually advancing solutions? And what we've discovered, and out of trial and error these last 4 or 5 years, is that all these requirements around funding, it's really actually when we got 30 leaders, Black leaders and Brown leaders from our organizations, and we brought them together and we just had a conversation about how can we advance a campaign together. The things they said to us was, I just don't have the capacity. I just don't have the capacity to take on another campaign. And when we tried, we found out that as we were trying, and as we were trying to advance, people just were overwhelmed. They just didn't have the bandwidth. And then George Floyd happened, and we started addressing anti-Blackness in our institutions. How are we prioritizing the work that we want to do together? And I would say maybe the last 6-7 months, we've started conversations that we've taken a step back to just have conversations about how does anti-Blackness shows up in our institutions? What is the impact of white supremacy and practices that white supremacy imposes on us and how we do our work, including when we say we don't have time, including the sense of time and the fact that we have to write everything down and the fact that we have to do certain things a certain way. And if we continue to operate under those norms and to talk about it that way, we will never have the time. So we decided that we needed to step back and actually have conversations that we're doing now around how those practices show up within our institutions and our organizing. And we are doing that now. So we've held 4 conversations with 60 leaders from the different organizations that make up that are within the organization, and actually diving deeper into those conversations, because unless we do that, we think we can do the other work.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Dagmar, hold tight a second. I'm gonna jump over to Cindy, because Suma hit on a couple of things I want you to chime in on just from your vantage point. You're currently a program officer at Julian Grace. I said that already. Julian Grace has really committed itself to support the work of Black, Indigenous, people of color led organizations. And I've heard you speak before about challenging the notions of anti-Blackness in our sector. What are you seeing as the opportunities and challenges, and how are you supporting cross-community alliance building in your work?
Thank you, Jawanza, and thank you so much, ICIRR, for all the great work that you're doing for inviting me to this conversation today. In terms of what I'm seeing in the field overall, I'm super inspired to hear this call to action for collective healing and collective organizing. What I'm seeing is organizations, build these new and stronger coalitions across issue areas and across race, leading together into community by being together and by showing up to each other's campaigns and by learning together. A few organizations who are doing some of this work that come to mind are like the HANA Center, Good Kids Mad City Englewood, and the Worker Center for Racial Justice. I'm also seeing organizations lean into learning and unlearning, and creating these moments of like self-awareness and collective reflection, also really grappling with questions of like anti-Blackness and what that looks like for people as individuals, but also within organizations. Several Latinx and Asian American organizations are having conversations with their staff and their boards, and also with community about race and the history of systemic racism and internalized racism and anti-Blackness. A couple of organizations that come to mind doing that work are Project Vision, CBCAC, OCAD, and Mano a Mano. I also am inspired to see how Black-led organizations are doing this work of learning and unlearning, collectively. And some of the organizations that I'm super inspired by are like COCO, Legion of Women's Hope Center, and Circles and Ciphers. And these are only a couple, right, of the many that I get to work with. Um, but I also want to say that this call to healing, this focus on healing, is super powerful. And I've seen folks do this, like, with groups like TRHT and Enrich Chicago, but also building their own healing spaces and the power that comes from that. So organizations that come to mind that are doing some of that are like Asada's Daughters and Along Walk Home and Brace Based Alliance. Um, I think you asked a little bit about the challenges and opportunities. I think that one of the challenge is that alongside this really great work, we also have this reality of how it is intentional, the divisions that are creating amongst our people of color communities, and that is still happening even among this great work. And that this narrative that there are not enough resources for all of us, and that not all of us can win. Right. And so for me, even with those challenges, I'm super inspired to continue to see how organizations are leading to disrupt that systemic racism by healing and by creating proximity with each other. And moving towards healing to continue to walk on this path of racial justice. And so overall, I'm seeing this like authentic understanding that our liberation is intertwined, because none of us can be free until we are all free.
I think we certainly have a theme going here. Thank you, Cindy. All right, Dagmar, skipped over you, coming back around. We gotta bring our legislator into this. In many ways, you are in the thick of it in a very different way. You're currently state representative in the Illinois State Legislature. You got elected with the help of a grassroots campaign. You worked at ICIRR. Based on your own lived experience, your experience working at ICIRR, how is that shaping your work as an elected official? I think I would like to hear that first, because it's, again, a very unique vantage point. But then connected to that, what do you see as the challenges and opportunities in the General Assembly, right? You having gone there with your experience, with your mission in mind, help us just unpack that for us a little bit.
Oof. That there's a lot to unpack there. and I'll say to the first question, right? How has my experience at ICIRR, how has my lived experience shaped the way that I legislate? I'll say first and foremost, these spaces are not created for us, right? We're usually the ones who are making the phone calls. We're usually the ones who are door knocking. It's telling people I'm here to support candidates based on values, right? So I think that one of the main things that I could say as far as how this work has shaped me has definitely been, working on electoral organizing that's centered in values and not people, not specific people, right? When we think about transformation as opposed to being transactional, we definitely have to think about how do we do movement building without this thought of like self-preservation, without this thought of like we need our saviors, when we ourselves collectively can move together for change, right? So I think that when I think about the work that I did at ICIRR, it is because I was very centered into what is the issue, what moves us, what is our self-interest as a community. I was able to actually get to where I'm at. We're looking at the 85th district, a district that 20 years ago was represented by a Republican representative. And we saw the shift here in the Midwest, particularly in the Chicagoland area, with Latinos moving to suburban areas, because no matter what people say,
we really have to have a conversation about the suburbanization of poverty, right? There's a lot of us who had this mindset that when we arrive into the US, we're looking at the American dream. And what is the American dream for many of our parents, right? I can tell you that for my parents, it was, I want to make sure that my daughters have a fair shot at getting a job without being discriminated because they're women. I want my two girls to learn English and be bilingual because we look at bilingualism as a strength, you know, not as a handicap as some people might see it. And most of all, she just wanted us to have a fair shot. And you know, when I moved to the suburbs, right, I have a different experience. I didn't move directly into the city. I moved to good old Schaumburg for a little bit, and then I spent the past 20 years of my life in Will County. So that you know, working at ICIRR, working with community organizations, but being the suburban immigrant, that in and of itself, there's a lot of different conversations around organizing that we could do when it comes to like, how do you organize in a city versus how do you organize in suburban areas? How do you look at allyship and how do you look at relationship building, that we could, you know, spend half a day just talking about those intricacies. But, you know, I think that for me, when I decided to run for office, one of the main things that I kept thinking about is why this, why now, why me, right? Why me, the person who spent you know, being undocumented for 13 years, the one who, as it was mentioned, you know, went to advocate for the DREAM Act because we were looking at our elected officials to do the right thing. We have to think about working collectively, not just as grassroots organizers, but then also really thinking about the shared values that we have to move policy, not just from being the organizers, but then also those in elected office to make it happen.
So go a little bit deeper on that last point a second. As an elected official, working with other elected officials, some who may share your values and some who frankly don't. What are the opportunities there? Like, how are you able to get things done? And what sort of finds its way on the cutting room floor, you know, so to speak, that you have to come back to? Like, how, just again, help us understand how that works.
Yeah, that's a really hard question, because there's not a single day where I don't think about, again, just going back to like, why am I doing this? What is the bigger picture? And when you think about those things, you have to realize that, you know, a lot of the people that you work with, when it comes to your colleagues, there's a lot of things that you have in common, but there are also things that you're never going to agree on, right? The art of compromise it's tough. You know, it's relational, to be quite honest. I think that a lot of the work that I've been able to do in the past 10 months has been because I come from a community organizing background where we know that relationships are everything. And just looking at those opportunities to know that the divide and conquer tactic that gets used on our communities over and over again, we have to go past that and just look at the bigger picture. How do we, right, as a collective, how do we move on criminal justice reform? How do we move together in making sure that we have a budget that's for the people, made by the people, that's equitable, right? How do we move on legislation where we talk about, you know, when it comes to the problem of community violence from a perspective of what are we doing to resolve the root causes, right? What are we doing to make sure that there are opportunities for our communities? And most of all, what are we doing to make sure that when we are negotiating, that we're not pitting communities against each other?
All right, everybody. Doc Mara just opened up a can of worms. So I'm gonna need you all to help me put a lid back on it a little bit, right? So just taking the last comments that Doc Mara made, and we're winding down in time, so I'm gonna ask people to be a little bit brief in their remarks, but how are you seeing people address systemic issues with the long view in mind while we're fighting for what needs to get won right now, right? So we have an eye towards where we need to go, but understanding the confines that we're operating in, what can we get done right now? How are you seeing it, and how would you like to see it? And anybody can jump in first.
So I'm just going to jump in quickly. This is why we created Until We're Free in terms of the coalition that is led by Baji, because of a frustration around that, right? That when we looked at the citizenship bills, when we looked at what was happening with enforcement priorities and other pieces, Black folk, I mean, people were literally, after having it explained that Black people were being left behind because of like criminal carve-outs, et cetera, to hear people in leadership in the immigrant rights movement say, well, Nana, somebody's got to be left behind. It's like, oh, okay, and you picked the Negro as the one to be left behind. Thank you. Once again, thank you very much. And that's real. That's absolutely real in terms of the way that Black migrant issues are dealt with. It's like, people sort of extra, if they want to show their extra wokeness, then they may sign something or put up a petition, sign the petition to have Cameroonian TPS. But in terms of really looking at what it is that we have as needs, that doesn't happen. Now, I think really briefly to, kind of some of Sulma's point, I think if we sit down and really look at who is powering the decisions about how we're moving in our movement, we're going to find that it's a lot of white women attorneys. And they may be well-meaning, but it's not us. So even if we're leading organizations, we are not the people that folks are relying on to decide what's our next move. And I think that we need to quickly make the next move on our end, which is actually to be relying on ourselves, actually relying on the people who are most impacted, and not thinking that organizers are boots on the ground robots who you just tell what to do, and then we show up and execute your brilliant white attorney dreams and ideas. But really understanding that the most impact, as I said, the ones who feel freedom the least know freedom the most, and that's who should be powering what we're doing. I think it'll make a big difference in that long game and show that we don't have to pick one or the other.
I think you just pulled some more worms out that can, Nana. You called out Suma, so I'm gonna have her come in and see if she has some additional thoughts on this particular question.
Absolutely, and I want to build on that, because in 2011, I became an executive director of an organization in Kansas that organization was started by Black leadership. Every time I walked into the office of that organization, when I first became the director, I had to walk past a line of about 20 protesters, Black protesters who were protesting the fact that a Latina had taken over the organization, because I was going to take over the organization and just make it a Latinx organization. And I completely understand what Nana is talking about, because I've lived it. I see it. I see it in the spaces where I think the movement and our own identity has been hijacked by an agenda that is not our agenda. So Nana and I talk about this all the time, and I completely understand and agree with that. But there are also, I don't think we can get to the point of talking legislative policy without understanding the background and dealing with this other stuff that's behind that, right? because by the time we get there, all this stuff is going to come up, right? The fact that we've been in silos is going to come up. The fact that we never did the work to bring our communities together and to talk about a vision that is more than just what happens over the next 5 years or 10 years, unless we break through the silos and actually build a vision for people of color together, we're always going to come up with those divisions in the moment we have to decide, because we haven't done the work. In Kansas, we realized that in order to win, it was 13% African-American votes of the general electorate, was about 11% Latinx and about 13% African-American. And we realized that some of it was just basic numbers, right? That if we brought those two numbers together, we could win just about any election. But it wasn't that easy. Some of it is transactional when we get there, but it doesn't happen, and it's not that easy unless we've done the work of really getting inside some of the tensions and the root causes that are getting, but that when we get there, we can't get past that if we haven't done the work. If we haven't done the intentional work of coming together, visualizing and imagining together something beyond what any of this, wide influence institutions can give us.
So, you know what? This has been an amazing conversation, and then I'm a little upset with the clock on the wall because it's telling me I got to wrap this up. So I'm a cheat a little bit. I'm gonna ask for closing remarks. I want to build on what you just said, Suma. I'm gonna go to Cindy to pull her in, and then everybody else will have a chance to comment. But in closing, right, as you give your final closing remarks, share with us some words of wisdom from your perspective, your vantage point, on how to do what Suma was talking about, how to address the silos and tensions across communities, across campaigns. How do we get out of this this swamp that we're all sort of trudging through and get to the promised land? Cindy, can you kind of open that up for us?
Yes, Joanza. And thank you all for the wonderful thoughts. I think to your question of, like, from my vantage point, that's philanthropy. And so that for me is like, what can we do to help? That means listen to community, uplift voices, fund, and then get out of the way. I feel like that is a call to action for philanthropy about what we should be doing in solidarity with movement work. I also think that in terms of what specifically, I think moving money to BIPOC communities, I think moving money to collaborations to really fund that, because so much of that work goes unfunded, and it becomes harder because of that. And I also think about organizing. Organizing has been underfunded for so long. Like, how are we moving money further? And I think finally, I think for us as foundations, our mandate is to give 5%, but I see that as a floor. How do we see this, instead of the roof, right? How are we pushing our fields, to really give more? Like, how do we get to that 10% as something that foundations are doing? So I would say that's a little bit what I think about for vantage point. In terms of community, proximity, I think, is one thing I would say in healing. Like, I feel like the closer that we are together, the more that we understand what exclusions mean, and what who those exclusions are criminalizing. Our uncles, our aunts, our parents, our neighbors, our church members. Like, we can't be okay with that, when all of the people are our people, right? So I'll pause there. Thank you, Joanza.
No, that's great. Thank you for being here, Cindy, and sharing your thoughts. Dagmar, same question to you.
Thank you. Cindy, I just kept nodding and nodding and nodding, because this has been, that has been something that I just kept talking about over and over again, right? Like, at the state level, we, part of the work that I was doing at ICIRR was looking at our state funded portfolio of programs, right? And, for the state, it's almost, I feel like we need to challenge each other to look at people beyond the numbers, right? When we look at productivity, what is it that we're doing, right? Because when we're thinking about, having a pathway to citizenship and helping legal permanent residents become citizens, we need to look at, a lot of the work that needs to be done in creating trust, right? Before people are able to take that step. I agree with Cindy. We need to continue, and I really, really have to emphasize this. We really need to make sure that we are continuing to fund organizing efforts. Organizing is not linear, and you cannot measure with numbers organizing. There is not a lot of power in numbers if you're not being intentional about the work that you're doing. I always would used to say that, I'd rather take 50 people to Springfield so that they could share their story, but understand the reasons why, as to taking 5 buses of people that just went to Springfield just because they wanted to see the Capitol. So that's been one of the things that when I keep thinking about what is it that we can do, we need to continue to collaborate. Again, just looking at the bigger picture, and the bigger picture is that, if we are not at the table, we're part of the menu.
Profound words there, Dagmar. Nana, let me bring you in here. Closing thoughts?
There's a lot of work to be done, and the work is work of relationship. And the work is work of, of realness, right? And of sort of putting aside the facades, and which means that people have to be able to be vulnerable, which is why relationship is important, right? Because if we're going to pretend, then we're not going to get too far. But I also want to say that I'm so thrilled to see that there are people who are doing this work. So as much as we can talk about maybe at certain levels that work not happening, on the ground where people know that they are all being evicted, where they know they're all being impacted by this COVID pandemic, where there are folks are getting locked up and getting deported or getting detained. We know what's up. And I think of the week of action. We just did a national week of action, October 11th through the 17th, in support of Black migrants. And we had folks from coast to coast, some of whom we knew, some of whom we did not know, focusing on Black migrants and on our issues. And so we know that there is an appetite, and more than an appetite, that people are doing, and it's just growing that. And that's the work that we're all committed to, including ICIRR, who is a big part of our National Week of Action with the United African Organization and the larger ICIRR crew.
Y'all are downright inspiring. Suma, you got a chance to drop the mic. Give us your last words on this before we get out of here.
All the work that we have to do, and it has to be work that is unseen and maybe not as glamorous, but beautiful, wonderful, and needed. And to build on what Nana said with that action, a lot of us had to be in that action, not seen, not have our logos up there, but really allow Black voices and Black leaders to lead. And that's something a lot of us aren't trained to do, because a lot of us want to be able to put it on funder reports and on whatever. And I just think, again, organizing is about building relationships, and is the only thing that relationship and organizing is gonna get us ready for the big moments when we have to make those decisions, when we sit around the policy table and think about who gets left out. If we have a vision for how we build it together, it won't be a hard decision. But if we don't do the organizing, if we don't do the relationship, then we'll have what we have now.
And with that, we'll close this out. Thank you, Nana. Thank you, Suma, Dagmar, and Cindy. Happy 35th birthday, ICIRR. And remember, everybody, none of us are free until we're all free. Take care. Enjoy the rest of the event.
Thank you to Juwanza and our wonderful panelists for sharing those insights. My name is Grace Pai, and I'm the Executive Director of Asian Americans Advancing Justice Chicago. Our organization is a proud ICIRR member, and I am one of the co-chairs of ICIRR's Action Council. One of the reasons that I love ICIRR is our commitment to organizing across communities for justice. ICIRR's membership is incredibly diverse. We represent many different communities, including Latinx, Black, and Asian immigrants, people with disabilities, faith communities, recent immigrants and refugees, and families who have been here for generations, undocumented folks and mixed status families, and the list goes on. We've all come together across difference to fight for the values that we share. The right for immigrants and refugees to live free from fear and to thrive, not just survive, in our communities with the support that they need and deserve. We have built powerful alliances and coalitions to make our values real in the world. And this work has been particularly critical this year as we continue the fight for citizenship for all. I can tell you that there's no better feeling than linking arms and throwing down together in solidarity and joyous rebellion in pursuit of our shared goals. Now we're going to hear a few testimonies from ICIRR members on why this work is so important to them.
Hello, my name is Seema Qureshi, Executive Director of Muslim Women's Resource Center. I'm so happy to celebrate ICIRR's 35th anniversary, one of my favorite organizations. We have been a member of ICIRR for more than 20 years. Through ICIRR's membership, Muslim Women's Resource Center receives annual funding from the state of Illinois, DHS, to assist over 1,000 immigrant families in this beautiful state. As a grassroots organization, there is always a need for coalition like ICIRR to support its members. ICIRR was our first funder then, and even now they're helping us with a wave of Afghan refugees coming. I remember when Brandon called me 2 months ago, and I started crying and didn't know where to begin, as we are all caught by surprise and none of us have the capacity to deal with this chaos. He promised that ICIRR is here for me and my team, and that the staff of ICIRR is a phone call away. As always, ICIRR staff stands on their promise. My experience with ICIRR has been great. I feel blessed, represented, and know that I am not alone fighting for immigrant and refugee rights. ICIRR has always been an incredible leader to immigrants and refugees, speaking and fighting for our rights, not just locally, but at a federal level with its many partner organizations. On behalf of Muslim Women's Resource Center, we thank ICIRR's leadership for its commitment and for recognizing Muslim Women's Resource Center as part of its membership. Thank you.
My name is Michelle Garcia. I'm the manager of community organizing at Access Living. I also do immigration and disability work. ICIRR is important to me because the work they do not only impacts immigrants, but it also impacts the work I do supporting immigrants with disabilities. Access Living and ICIRR have a long-standing history of work together. We've been working together for decades, and this long-standing partnership enables us to reach disabled folks that we might not be able to otherwise. Access Living is a member organization of ICIRR, and being able to connect with so many other organizations has been helpful in furthering our advocacy efforts for immigrants with disabilities. Over the years, as I've worked with ICIRR, it's been powerful to watch them expand their knowledge about disability and become more inclusive when it comes to providing accommodations. Truly including disabled members of the immigrant community in their advocacy and organizing efforts is essential to inclusive advocacy. They've really listened to what Access Living has to say about disability and made huge strides in disability inclusion. To me, being part of ICIRR means that immigrants with disabilities are included and have a voice at the table within the work that we're doing to advance advocacy for immigrants broadly.
Hello, my name is Fasika Alam, and I am Programs Director with the United African Organization. ICIRR is a vital and powerful voice for immigrant communities across the state of Illinois. It's really because of ICIRR and its member organizations that Illinois is a welcoming state, an immigrant welcoming state. Just over the last 2 years, ICIRR has led the fight to secure several important policy wins for immigrant communities. I'm talking about the expansion of health insurance coverage for low-income immigrant seniors, largely undocumented seniors, who are otherwise ineligible for publicly funded health insurance because of their immigration status. This is expected to provide more than 4,000 immigrants with access to much-needed health care. I'm talking about ICIRR's advocacy early in the pandemic for emergency financial support for our most vulnerable community members who were not otherwise eligible for other resources. In the first 2 rounds, UAO submitted more than 500 applications on behalf of families. And we are currently working to process another, more than 500 or more applications. I'm talking about the fight to eliminate collaborations and government contracts with ICE, a system that facilitates the oppression of Black and Brown people. This work must continue. On a personal note, working with ICIRR has been a great learning opportunity, an opportunity for collaborative work, for solidarity building with individuals and organizations in the social and justice, racial justice work. I'm grateful for the grace and patience ICIRR staff continue to extend to me as I find my footing in this work. ICIRR has also been very intentional about centering the voice of Black immigrants in its work. That means a lot to me, to the United African Organization and the communities we represent. This also speaks to that understanding that immigration justice is intertwined with racial justice and requires a commitment to justice for all. We're not free until we are all free. This work must continue, and your support will help make that happen. Thank you.
Thank you to all our panelists and speakers today, and thank you to all our valuable supporters and donors. My name is Eli Cervantes. I'm the co-founder of SSIP Chicago, the Southwest Suburban Immigrant Project. We are a proud and active member organization of ICIRR for over 10 years. I'm also here representing ICIRR's Board of Directors, where I serve as the Vice President. And on behalf of our member organizations and our board, I want to thank you for tuning in. The very first time I participated in an ICIRR membership meeting, I was just 20 years old. There was so much power in that room and so much energy. It was filled with people from different immigrant and refugee communities. As an undocumented student, terrified of driving without a driver's license, and constantly anxious about ICE being out in our streets, I was overwhelmed with questions about my future, the future of my family, and the future of my community. And I thought I was alone. But that ICIRR membership meeting that night impacted me profoundly. I realized that I was part of a larger community of people directly impacted by an oppressive immigration system that were fighting back. To experience that at that age was transformative for me. Since then, I have witnessed many significant wins in our movement nationally and statewide, from winning driver's licenses for all in Illinois, which my parents were able to obtain, to making sure that our state is one of the strongest states in the country with protections against ICE. We have worked to mobilize voters and accompany thousands in their journeys to becoming citizens, as well as organize DACA workshops, which have changed the lives of young people like myself. But we're not done, especially this year. We have thrown down in such a mighty way, keeping up the pressure, both locally and in Washington, DC, to advocate for a pathway to citizenship after 35 years. We have been a constant voice in the national narrative, standing up and fighting back for our entire undocumented community, leaving no one behind. To say that it has not been easy would be an understatement. but we can't give up, not until we are all free. As an undocumented woman, sister, friend, daughter, I am committed to this change work, but this is where you come in too. Today, I want to ask you to visit the link on your screen right now and make a donation. If we are to keep this fire burning, we need your support. Be a seed for the next generation. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here with us. And don't leave without pledging your support for this work. Sí se puede.